It starts with a single question. A question so simple, it feels almost insulting. In a world of labyrinthine financial analysis, of thousand-page annual reports, of arcane valuation models and armies of Wall Street analysts, one man, after 60 years of studying the intricate machinery of business, concluded that the vast majority of it is noise. He discovered that the single most important variable, the genetic code of a truly great enterprise, the one thing that separates the fleeting successes from the enduring dynasties of wealth, can be unearthed with one simple inquiry. This man, Warren Buffett, has built a personal fortune of over $100 billion and a corporate empire in Berkshire Hathaway worth nearly $1 trillion. Not by being the most complex thinker, but by being the most fundamental. He has a unique talent for shearing away layers of complexity to reveal the pulsing heart of a problem. And for investors, entrepreneurs, and executives, the central problem is always the same. How do you distinguish a truly great business from a merely good one? How do you find a company with a real, durable competitive advantage in a world of cutthroat competition? His answer, refined in the crucible of thousands of deals and decades of market cycles, is the pricing power question. If a business came to you and you were its sole owner, could you raise its prices by 10% tomorrow and not lose a significant number of your customers to a competitor? Could you do it again the next year and the year after that? If the answer is yes, you have found one of the rarest creatures in the economic jungle. A business with a moat around it. A fortress defended not by walls of brick and mortar, but by the fortress of the customer's mind. If the answer is no, you are likely looking at a commodity business, a brutal, capital-intensive affair where the only weapon is price, and the only outcome is a race to the bottom. This question is the ultimate acid test. It's a tool of such profound clarity that once you understand it, you will never look at a company, a stock, or even your own business in the same way again. It is the secret to Warren Buffett investing, the cornerstone of his entire philosophy, and the most powerful piece of CEO advice you will ever receive. This isn't just about financial analysis. It's about understanding human psychology, brand loyalty, and the very nature of value itself. This is the key that unlocks the door to identifying companies that don't just survive, but thrive, compounding capital and creating financial freedom for their owners decade after decade. This is the story of that one question, and the immense power it holds. Our journey into the heart of this concept begins not in a modern boardroom, but in the gritty, ink-stained world of mid-20th century newspapers and the flickering glow of early television. It was here, long before he was the Oracle of Omaha, that a young Warren Buffett learned a foundational lesson that would shape his entire investment strategy. In the 1950s and 60s, newspapers were formidable businesses. Many towns had only one, giving them a local monopoly on information, advertising, and community life. They were, in his words, unregulated monopolies. Buffett was drawn to them, and he invested in several, including the Baltimore Sun. On the surface, it looked like a perfect business. It had a long history, a respected name, and a captive audience. But something was changing. A new technology was emerging, one that would fundamentally alter the competitive landscape: television. Buffett also had the opportunity to analyze and later invest in a television station. Let's call it the dominant local broadcast affiliate in a major city. To the casual observer, both the newspaper and the TV station were media businesses, selling advertising to local merchants. But when Buffett applied his nascent version of the pricing power question, he saw two entirely different economic realities. The Baltimore Sun, despite its history, was beginning to feel the pressure. It had competition. There were other papers, radio stations, and the growing influence of television. If the Sun raised its advertising rates by a significant margin, say 20%, local car dealerships and department stores had alternatives. They could grumble, negotiate, or shift a portion of their budget to the new TV station that was capturing more and more of the public's attention. The newspaper had some pricing power, born of habit and its established reader base, but it was finite and eroding. Now, consider the television station. In that era, due to FCC licensing and the sheer cost of broadcast technology, most cities had a very limited number of channels, often just the three major network affiliates: CBS, NBC, and ABC. The station Buffett analyzed was the #1 rated affiliate in its market. It was the dominant force. When a local business wanted to reach the largest possible audience with a visual, emotional message, there was no real substitute. Radio couldn't offer the visuals. The newspaper couldn't offer the sound and motion. Another TV station couldn't offer the same number of eyeballs. So what happened when the station's general manager decided to raise ad rates by 10 or even 15%? The local businesses had to pay it. They had no other choice if they wanted to achieve their marketing goals. They were hooked. The station had a virtual pipeline into the wallets of every major advertiser in the city. Buffett realized the TV station was a far superior business, not because its revenues were necessarily higher at that moment, but because the quality of those revenues was infinitely better. It possessed a structural, near-monopolistic competitive advantage that the newspaper was losing. This simple comparison laid the groundwork for his entire philosophy. The newspaper had to fight for every dollar. The TV station simply had to open the mail. This early insight is the key to understanding the deep logic behind pricing power. It's rooted in a fundamental economic and psychological principle: inelastic demand. In economics, elasticity measures how much the quantity demanded of a good changes in response to a change in its price. For a product with highly elastic demand, a small price increase leads to a large drop in sales. Think of two gas stations across the street from each other, selling the exact same grade of gasoline. If one raises its price by 10 cents a gallon, its sales will plummet as customers flock to the cheaper option. This is the world of commodities. Inelastic demand is the opposite. It's when a price increase has very little effect on the quantity demanded. This is the holy grail. This is where true wealth is created. But why does this happen? The reason is psychological. It's not about the product itself, but what it represents in the customer's mind. Inelastic demand is created by a lack of perceived substitutes. For the advertiser in Buffett's TV station example, there was no viable substitute for reaching the largest audience in the city with a moving picture. For a lifelong smoker loyal to Marlboro, the generic brand might be chemically similar, but it's not a psychological substitute. It doesn't satisfy the craving for the brand identity they've known for decades. This is where a powerful cognitive bias, the status quo bias, comes into play. Humans are creatures of habit. We are neurologically wired to prefer things to stay the same. Change requires effort, risk, and cognitive load. The status quo bias is our brain's tendency to favor our current situation and to view any deviation from it as a potential loss. A company with pricing power has successfully embedded itself as the status quo in the customer's life. Switching to a competitor, even a slightly cheaper one, isn't just a simple transaction. It's an active decision to break a habit, to learn a new system, to risk disappointment. Think about Microsoft Office in the corporate world. An IT department could save money by switching to a free alternative like Google Docs or LibreOffice. But the cost of retraining thousands of employees, the risk of file compatibility issues, and the disruption to established workflows is immense. The perceived pain of switching far outweighs the potential gain of the lower price. Microsoft knows this, which is why they can confidently raise prices for their enterprise software year after year. They aren't just selling software, they are selling the status quo. They have institutionalized themselves within their customers' operations, creating a powerful moat of inertia. This is why pricing power is the ultimate indicator of a competitive advantage. It's a direct measure of how deeply a company has managed to lock itself into the lives and minds of its customers, insulating itself from the chaotic forces of pure price competition. Now let's translate this powerful theory into a practical tool, a mental model you can apply to any business you analyze. We'll call it the 10% test framework, a structured way to apply Buffett's central question. Step 1 is to clearly identify the specific product or service and its direct competitors. This sounds simple, but it requires precision. For example, if you're analyzing Starbucks, the product isn't just coffee. It's a premium, consistent, quick-service coffee experience. The competitors aren't just every diner and fast food chain. The most direct competitors are other premium coffee chains like Peet's Coffee or local artisanal shops. You have to compare apples to apples. Step 2 is to analyze the customer's switching costs. This is the heart of the analysis. Switching costs come in 3 forms. First, there are financial costs. For example, switching your company's entire accounting system from one software provider to another involves direct costs for the new software, implementation, and training. Second, there are procedural or effort-based costs. This is the hassle factor. Switching your mobile phone provider, even with number portability, requires time, research, and dealing with new contracts. For many, the effort outweighs the potential savings. Third, and most powerfully, are psychological costs. This is the risk of the unknown. Your current brand delivers a known quantity of quality and service. A new brand might be a disappointment. The comfort of the familiar is a powerful psychological anchor that creates stickiness. A company with high switching costs in all 3 categories likely has immense pricing power. Step 3 is to evaluate the brand's intangible assets. This is about trust, reputation, and emotional connection. Why would someone pay $150 for a pair of Nike running shoes when a generic brand costs $30? It's not just about the physical materials. It's about the decades of marketing, the association with elite athletes, the swoosh logo that signals quality and a commitment to performance. This brand equity creates a belief in the customer's mind that the product is worth more. It's an intangible shield against price competition. You must ask, is the brand loved, or is it merely tolerated? Is it a badge of identity or just a utility? Step 4 is to conduct the thought experiment itself. Imagine the company announces a 10% price hike across the board, effective tomorrow. What is the immediate, visceral reaction of the customer base? Would they complain on social media but ultimately sigh and pay up, as millions of Netflix subscribers do when their monthly fee increases? Or would there be a mass exodus, a frantic search for alternatives, as would happen if a single brand of generic milk tried to raise its price by 10% in a supermarket? The answer to this thought experiment, informed by your analysis of the competition, switching costs, and brand, will give you an incredibly clear signal about the true strength of the business. It's a process of business analysis that cuts through the spreadsheets and focuses on the human element that ultimately drives every transaction. Yet, this way of thinking is the exception, not the rule. The path of the 99% of investors and managers is fundamentally different, and it's littered with the wreckage of failed enterprises. Most people are seduced by the siren song of growth. They see a company whose revenues are soaring 50% year over year, and they get excited. They see user numbers skyrocketing, and they assume success is inevitable. They fall into the trap of confusing activity with progress, revenue with profit, and market share with market power. The dot-com bubble of the late 1990s was the ultimate example of this folly. Companies like Pets.com or Webvan were lauded as the future. They were growing their customer bases at a blistering pace. Their stock prices reached astronomical valuations. But they completely failed the pricing power test. Their entire business model was based on the opposite of pricing power. They were using billions of dollars of venture capital to subsidize artificially low prices to attract customers. They weren't building brand loyalty, they were building price sensitivity. Customers weren't flocking to them because they loved the service. They were flocking to them because it was cheap. The moment a competitor offered a lower price, or the moment the venture capital funding ran out and they were forced to raise prices to reflect their true costs, the customers vanished. They had built their houses on the sand of unsustainable pricing, and when the tide of capital receded, they were washed away. They had millions of eyeballs, but not a single loyal customer in the truest sense of the word. They had no moat, they had no fortress, they had no pricing power. The fatal flaw is to chase growth for growth's sake, without ever asking about the quality and durability of that growth. It's a lesson that is learned and forgotten with every market cycle, but for those who understand the 10% test, it provides a permanent defense against such speculative manias. And the difference between these two paths isn't just philosophical, it is brutally apparent on the financial statements. This is the direct financial connection. A company with true pricing power has a financial signature that is unmistakable. Look first at the gross margin, which is revenue minus the cost of goods sold. A company like Coca-Cola, which sells branded syrup concentrate, has gross margins that are consistently above 60%. A commodity business like a steel manufacturer will be lucky to have gross margins of 15% in a good year. That massive difference is a direct quantification of pricing power. It's the surplus value the brand commands over the raw cost of its inputs. Next, look at the net profit margin, which is the profit left after all expenses are paid. Companies with pricing power, like Microsoft or Moody's, consistently post net margins of 25, 30, or even 40%. They can afford to spend on research and development, on marketing, and on rewarding shareholders, and still have enormous profits left over. An airline, the classic example of a business without pricing power, will have net margins in the low single digits, and in many years, they will be negative. The ability to set prices translates directly into a river of profit flowing to the bottom line. Finally, and most importantly, look at the stability and consistency of those margins. A commodity business's profits will swing wildly with the price of its raw materials and the whims of the market. A true pricing power fortress, a company like See's Candies, can raise its prices every single year, like clockwork, regardless of the economic climate, and its margins remain high and stable. This financial stability is the tangible reward for building a moat in the customer's mind. It is the mathematical proof of a superior business, a business that doesn't just play the game, but sets the rules. There is no story that better illustrates the acquisition and cultivation of pricing power than the tale of a small, family-owned chocolate company from California. In 1972, Warren Buffett and his partner, Charlie Munger, were presented with an opportunity to buy See's Candies. At the time, Berkshire Hathaway was still transitioning from its origins as a struggling textile manufacturer. Buffett was a cigar butt investor, trained by his mentor Ben Graham to look for quantitatively cheap businesses, buying fair companies at wonderful prices. See's Candies was not a fair company, it was a wonderful company, and the See family wanted a wonderful price for it, $30 million. The company was earning about $2 million a year after tax. Its tangible assets, the factories, the inventory, the stores, were only worth about $8 million. Buffett, the disciplined value investor, looked at the numbers. A price of $30 million for a business with only $8 million in tangible assets seemed outrageous. It violated the principles he had followed for his entire career. He was on the verge of walking away. This is a pivotal moment in investment history, for it was Charlie Munger who pushed him. Munger saw something beyond the balance sheet. He understood that the true value of See's Candies wasn't in its factories or its inventory. It was in the minds of millions of Californians. He argued that they had to be willing to pay a premium for quality, for a brand that commanded an irrational loyalty from its customers. Reluctantly, Buffett agreed to negotiate. After some back and forth, they settled on a price of $25 million. It was still far more than Buffett had ever paid relative to tangible assets for any business. He was nervous. It turned out to be one of the most important investments he ever made, not just for the financial returns, but for the profound lesson it taught him. See's Candies became his and Munger's prototype for the perfect business. What they discovered was that See's had a magical quality. It was a beloved brand, deeply woven into the cultural fabric of the West Coast. For generations, a box of See's was the default gift for birthdays, for Valentine's Day, for Christmas, for a thank you gesture. When a son went to visit his mother, he brought a box of C's. It was a social convention. And this gave the company extraordinary pricing power. Soon after acquiring the company, Buffett and Munger discovered just how powerful it was. They realized they could raise prices by 10% a year, and nobody would leave. The customers grumbled a bit, but they came back. They came back year after year. The price of a 1-pound box of chocolates went from a few dollars in 1972 to over $20 today, far outpacing inflation. The reason was simple. When you're buying a gift for a loved one, you don't want to be cheap. The few dollars you might save by buying a generic brand of chocolates from the supermarket aren't worth the risk of being seen as thoughtless. The price is a secondary consideration to the emotional signal you are sending. C's wasn't just selling chocolates, it was selling nostalgia, quality, and the certainty of a well-received gift. They famously had a meeting every year right after Christmas to decide on the price increase for the next year. It was an automatic decision. The question wasn't if they should raise prices, but by how much. This small, $25 million acquisition became an engine of cash for Berkshire Hathaway. Over the subsequent decades, it would go on to generate over $2 billion in pre-tax earnings, cash that Buffett could then redeploy into other wonderful businesses. It taught him that it's far better to pay a fair price for a wonderful company than a wonderful price for a fair company. C's Candies was the living embodiment of the pricing power thesis. It had a moat, not of patents or technology, but of pure, unadulterated brand loyalty and customer habit. The psychology behind this phenomenon is fascinating and goes far beyond simple brand recognition. The power of C's Candies is rooted in the psychology of nostalgia and gifting culture. Nostalgia is one of the most potent human emotions. It's a bittersweet longing for the past, and it's a powerful driver of consumer behavior. For many people on the West Coast, the taste and smell of a C's chocolate are inextricably linked to positive memories of childhood, family gatherings, and celebrations. When they buy a box of C's, they are not just buying a confection. They are buying a small piece of their own history, a ticket back to a happy moment. This emotional connection makes the product incredibly sticky and insulates it from price competition. You cannot create a substitute for someone's memories. A new, cheaper brand of chocolate can't compete with decades of accumulated goodwill and personal history. This taps into another cognitive bias known as the availability heuristic. This is a mental shortcut that relies on immediate examples that come to a given person's mind when evaluating a specific topic. For millions of people, when they think high-quality boxed chocolates, the first and most available example that pops into their head is C's. This top-of-mind awareness makes C's the default choice, the path of least resistance. Why spend mental energy researching other brands when you already know and trust this one? The company has earned a privileged position in the consumer's mental Rolodex. Furthermore, the context of the purchase is critical. C's is predominantly a gift item. The psychology of gift giving is entirely different from the psychology of personal consumption. When we buy something for ourselves, we are often more price sensitive. But when we buy a gift, the primary goal is to send a social signal to the recipient. The signal might be, "I love you," "I appreciate you," or "I am thinking of you." In this context, the price of the gift is part of the signal. Choosing a cheaper, unknown brand might be interpreted as a sign of cheapness or lack of care, a social risk that most people are unwilling to take. The price of the C's box is a small insurance policy against sending the wrong message. This combination of nostalgia, the availability heuristic, and the social dynamics of gifting creates a psychological fortress around the brand, allowing it to command prices that have no rational connection to the cost of its ingredients. It's a masterclass in behavioral economics. So how can an investor or an entrepreneur systematically evaluate these powerful but fuzzy intangible assets? We can build a mental model for this, the intangible asset valuation model. It's a way to look past the hard numbers on the balance sheet and assess the real economic strength of a brand. Step 1 is to explicitly look beyond the tangible assets. While a company's factories, inventory, and real estate are important, For a business with pricing power, they represent a tiny fraction of its true value. You must consciously acknowledge that you are trying to value something invisible, the company's reputation and its relationship with its customers. Step 2 is to perform a historical pricing analysis. This is the quantitative part of the model. Go back 10 or 20 years and track the price of the company's core product or service. Has the company consistently raised prices at a rate equal to, or ideally, greater than the rate of inflation? If it has, without losing significant market share, you have found a powerful clue. This historical track record is concrete evidence of pricing power in action. For C's, this data would be a long, beautiful, upward-sloping line. Step 3 involves surveying customer sentiment and brand perception. In the digital age, this is easier than ever. Read customer reviews on multiple platforms. Visit online forums and social media groups dedicated to the brand or industry. Is the language used by customers one of passion, love, and loyalty, or is it one of utility, complaints, and price comparisons? Do customers act as brand evangelists defending the company against critics? The qualitative data you gather here provides the why behind the numbers you found in Step 2. You are trying to determine if the brand is a cherished icon or a begrudging necessity. Step 4 is to connect this back to the financials, specifically by focusing on owner earnings, Buffett's preferred measure of profitability. Calculate the company's owner earnings over the past decade and ask yourself, how much of this consistent profitability is due to the brand's ability to command premium prices? How much additional capital has the company needed to invest to generate this growing stream of earnings? A company like C's requires very little new capital to grow. Its growth comes from pushing the price lever, not from building dozens of new factories. This results in an incredibly high return on tangible capital, the financial hallmark of a business with a powerful intangible asset. This model forces you to think like a business owner, not a stock trader. It prioritizes the qualitative strength of the brand and then verifies it with the long-term financial performance, providing a much deeper and more reliable picture of a company's competitive advantage. But this patient, quality-focused approach is the exact opposite of what conventional business wisdom might have prescribed for C's candies. Imagine the path of the 99%. If a typical MBA-trained CEO from the 1970s had taken over C's, the playbook would have been predictable and disastrous. The first order of business would have been optimization and synergies. They would have looked at the cost of ingredients and immediately sought to replace the expensive, high-quality nuts and chocolates with cheaper substitutes to boost gross margins in the short term. The customer might not notice at first, they'd argue, but this would be the first cut in a death by 1,000 cuts, slowly eroding the very foundation of the brand's reputation for quality. Next, they would have focused on aggressive expansion. They would have seen the brand's success in California and tried to rapidly open hundreds of stores across the entire United States, moving into markets where the brand had no history and no nostalgic connection. They would have saturated the market, making the brand feel common instead of special. To fuel this rapid growth, they would have likely turned to franchising, relinquishing control over the customer experience to hundreds of different operators. This would have inevitably led to inconsistencies in service and quality, further diluting the premium feel of the brand. In short, they would have harvested the brand, treating it like a resource to be exploited for short-term growth, rather than a garden to be cultivated for long-term prosperity. Within a decade, this optimized version of C's would have been just another candy company, forced to compete on price, its magical moat filled in and paved over with the asphalt of generic business school strategy. Buffett and Munger did the opposite. They protected the brand obsessively. They maintained the quality of the ingredients at all costs. They expanded slowly and deliberately. They understood that they were the stewards of a precious and irreplaceable intangible asset. The financial consequences of their stewardship are staggering. This is the direct financial connection. The $25 million investment in C's Candies has, as mentioned, returned over $2 billion to Berkshire Hathaway. But the key metric to understand is the return on tangible capital employed, ROTCE. Let's say in a given year, See's earned $50 million pre-tax, but it only required $10 million of tangible assets, factories, stores, to operate. That's a 500% return on tangible capital. Because its growth came from price increases rather than massive capital investment, the incremental returns were almost infinite. The business gushed cash. This is the financial magic of pricing power. It uncouples earnings growth from capital investment. Most businesses have to spend $1 of capital to get a few cents of additional annual profit. A business like See's could generate an extra $1 of profit by simply printing a new menu, requiring almost no additional capital. This geyser of high-return cash flow became a critical component of Berkshire's growth engine, providing the float that Buffett could then use to buy other businesses like Coca-Cola, American Express, and Apple. All companies that, in their own way, shared the same fundamental characteristic he first learned to truly appreciate from a small California chocolate maker. See's Candies wasn't just a good investment, it was an education. It fundamentally rewired Buffett's brain and set the stage for the second, and far more profitable, half of his career. To truly grasp why pricing power is the ultimate competitive advantage, we must venture deeper into the mind of the consumer. Why are people willing, even eager, to pay a significant premium for one product over a nearly identical competitor? The answer lies not in logic, but in the complex tapestry of human psychology, identity, and emotion. There is perhaps no better modern illustration of this than the story of Apple's resurrection under Steve Jobs. In 1997, when Jobs returned to the company he had co-founded, Apple was on the brink of bankruptcy. It was selling a confusing array of beige computer boxes that were locked in a desperate battle for a tiny sliver of the market against the dominance of Microsoft's Windows. Apple was a company with virtually no pricing power. Its products were seen as niche, overpriced, and incompatible with the rest of the world. Jobs' genius was in realizing that to save Apple, he couldn't compete on Microsoft's terms. He couldn't win by making a cheaper or slightly faster beige box. He had to change the game entirely. He had to build a moat, not of technical specifications but of desire. The turning point was the iPod. Before the iPod, MP3 players were clunky, complicated gadgets for tech hobbyists. They were a commodity. Jobs' team created a device that was not just functional, but beautiful, intuitive, and seamlessly integrated with the iTunes software. But more importantly, they created a brand identity around it. The iconic white earbuds and silhouetted dancing figures in the commercials didn't just sell a music player, they sold an identity. You weren't just a person listening to music, you were an iPod person, creative, modern, and a little bit different. This laid the groundwork for the ultimate pricing power machine, the iPhone. In 2007, the smartphone market existed, but it was dominated by functional devices from Nokia and BlackBerry, aimed at business executives. They were tools. When Jobs unveiled the iPhone, he presented something entirely different. It was a revolutionary user interface, a beautiful object, and an internet communicator all in one. He priced it at a staggering $499 for the 4 GB model and $599 for the 8 GB model, and that was with a 2-year AT&T contract. It was orders of magnitude more expensive than most other phones on the market. By conventional logic, it should have been a niche product. Instead, it created a global frenzy. People lined up for days to be the first to own one. The high price didn't deter them. It reinforced the product's desirability. The price was a feature, not a bug. It signaled that this was a premium product, a status symbol. Apple had successfully created a new category and crowned itself king, giving it the power to set prices at a level its competitors could only dream of. Year after year, new iPhones are released at premium prices, and year after year, millions of people eagerly upgrade. Apple has built the most powerful psychological moat in modern business history. The core psychological principle at play here is identity signaling. For many consumers, the products they buy are not just tools to accomplish a task. They are extensions of their own identity. They are badges that signal to the world and to themselves who they are and what they value. Driving a Tesla isn't just about transportation. It's about signaling a commitment to technology, the environment, and a certain vision of the future. Wearing a Rolex isn't just about telling time. It's about signaling success, precision, and heritage. Apple has mastered this better than any company on earth. Owning an iPhone, a MacBook, and AirPods signals that you are part of the creative class, that you value design, simplicity, and a seamless user experience. This act of signaling creates an incredibly strong emotional bond with the brand, making price a much less significant factor in the purchasing decision. You're not just buying a phone, you're reaffirming your identity. This is amplified by another powerful cognitive bias, the halo effect. The halo effect is our tendency to allow our impression of a person, company, or product in one domain to influence our evaluation of them in other domains. Because Apple's industrial design is widely perceived as beautiful and its user interface is seen as intuitive, we subconsciously assume that everything else about the company and its products must be superior as well: its processors, its cameras, its security, and crucially, its pricing. The positive feelings we have about Apple's design create a halo that makes the premium price feel justified and reasonable. We believe the product is worth more simply because it's an Apple product. This effect is further reinforced after the purchase by choice-supportive bias, our tendency to retroactively ascribe positive attributes to an option we have selected. Once we've spent $1,000 on a new iPhone, our brain works overtime to convince us it was the right decision, cementing our loyalty and making us even more likely to buy from the brand in the future. These psychological forces, working in concert, create a self-reinforcing loop of brand loyalty and pricing power that is incredibly difficult for competitors to break. A practical way to deconstruct this phenomenon is through the customer job to be done framework, a powerful mental model developed by the late Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen. The basic idea is that customers don't buy products, they hire them to do a job. This framework forces you to look beyond the features of a product and understand the real, underlying motivation of the customer. Step 1 is to ask what job the customer is hiring the product to do. This requires looking past the obvious. On a functional level, someone hires a smartphone to make calls, send texts, and browse the internet. But this is a superficial analysis. The real insight comes from identifying the social and emotional dimensions of the job. Step 2 is to break down these dimensions. For an iPhone user, the functional job is communication and computation. But the social job might be to signal that they are part of a certain social group, that they have good taste, or that they are tech-savvy. The emotional job might be to feel creative, productive, and secure within a familiar and reliable ecosystem. A customer is simultaneously trying to solve all three jobs with a single purchase. Step 3 is to analyze how well the company solves all three dimensions compared to its competitors. Many Android phone manufacturers do an excellent job of solving the functional job. Their phones have great cameras, fast processors, and big screens. But most of them do a poor job of solving the social and emotional jobs. They lack the cohesive brand identity, the status signaling, and the integrated ecosystem that Apple provides. They are functional utilities, not objects of desire. Step 4 is to recognize that pricing power exists when a company is so uniquely good at solving the social and emotional jobs that customers are unwilling to switch to a competitor who only solves the functional job, even at a much lower price. The premium price of the iPhone is the fee customers are willing to pay for the fulfillment of these deeper, intangible needs. By using this framework, an investor or entrepreneur can cut through the noise of technical specifications and understand what truly drives customer loyalty and willingness to pay a premium. It reveals the hidden sources of a company's competitive advantage. This focus on the deeper job of a product stands in stark contrast to the path of the 99%. Most companies, especially in the technology sector, fall into the trap of competing solely on features and price. They are engaged in a relentless race to the bottom, believing that the path to success is to offer more megapixels, more gigabytes, or more processing speed for less money. The Android smartphone market of the early 2010s is a perfect case study. Dozens of manufacturers, Samsung, HTC, LG, Motorola, were all locked in a brutal war for market share. Their strategy was simple: build a phone that had similar or slightly better specs than the iPhone, but sell it for a lower price. They were trying to compete on the functional dimension alone. The result was a bloodbath of commoditization. With a few exceptions, like Samsung's high-end models, none of them were able to build significant brand loyalty. Customers would switch between brands based on which one was offering the best deal that year. Margins were razor-thin, and many of these once great companies, like HTC and LG, have since faded into irrelevance or exited the smartphone business entirely. They were so focused on matching the what of the iPhone that they completely missed the why. They failed to understand that Apple wasn't selling specs in a plastic case. It was selling an identity, an experience, and an ecosystem. They were fighting a battle of logic against an opponent who had mastered the art of emotion, and it was a battle they were destined to lose. The financial result of Apple's strategy is a testament to the awesome power of this psychological moat. The direct financial connection is clearer here than in almost any other company in history. Apple's financial statements are a work of art. The first place to look is their gross margin on hardware. For a consumer electronics company, a gross margin of 15 to 20% is considered respectable. For years, Apple has maintained gross margins on its products in the 35 to 40% range. This is almost unheard of. That extra 20% margin, multiplied across hundreds of millions of devices sold, represents tens of billions of dollars per year that flow directly to Apple's bottom line. This is the Apple tax, the premium customers are willing to pay for the brand, design, and experience. But the genius of Apple's model doesn't stop there. The premium hardware, which has pricing power, serves as a gateway into their high-margin services division. Once a customer buys an iPhone, they are drawn into the ecosystem of the App Store, Apple Music, iCloud, and Apple Pay. This services business carries even higher gross margins, often exceeding 70%. The brand's power allows them to sell the hardware at a premium, and the hardware then locks the customer into an ecosystem that generates a recurring stream of incredibly profitable revenue. This two-step model is a financial fortress. It results in a torrent of free cash flow, the lifeblood of any great business. Apple generates more free cash flow, the cash left over after all operating expenses and capital expenditures, than almost any company in history. This allows them to invest billions in research and development, return hundreds of billions to shareholders through dividends and buybacks, and maintain a fortress balance sheet with a massive cash hoard. This entire financial empire is built on a single foundation: the psychological power of its brand, which grants it the extraordinary ability to set its prices far above its costs, an ability its competitors can only envy. For every fortress of pricing power like Apple or See's Candies, there are 1,000 open fields where companies engage in a brutal, hand-to-hand combat for survival. This is the world without pricing power, the world of commodities, and it is a perilous place for an investor's capital. Warren Buffett's most painful and formative lesson in this reality came not from an investment he made in someone else's company, but from the very company that would become his legendary vehicle, Berkshire Hathaway. When Buffett began buying shares of Berkshire in 1962, it was a struggling New England textile mill. It was the quintessential cigar butt investment. The stock was trading for less than the company's working capital, meaning he was essentially getting the factories and equipment for free. It was a statistically cheap asset. He took control of the company and installed a brilliant manager, Ken Chase, to run the operations. Chase was a master of efficiency. He streamlined production, negotiated hard with suppliers, and squeezed every last penny of cost out of the antiquated mills. For a while, it seemed to work. They would eke out a small profit. But then, the brutal economics of the textile industry would always reassert themselves. The moment Berkshire started to do well, a competitor, either domestically or overseas, would get desperate for business and slash their price for a basic textile product like a suit lining. To keep their customers, Berkshire would be forced to match the price, wiping out their hard-earned profits. The industry was a treadmill of misery. The technology was basic, meaning new competitors could enter the market easily. The product was undifferentiated, A suit lining from Berkshire was fundamentally the same as a suit lining from a mill in South Carolina or, increasingly, from Japan. The customers, the suit manufacturers, had all the power. They would play one mill against another to get the absolute lowest price. It was a classic commodity business. Buffett later reflected on this experience with brutal honesty. He said that running a commodity business is like being in a race where you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. Every time they invented a more efficient manufacturing process, the savings were immediately competed away and passed on to the customer in the form of lower prices. The capital required to stay competitive was immense. They constantly had to buy new looms and equipment just to keep up, but these investments never generated a decent return. The money poured into the business was like water poured into sand. This 20-year struggle with the textile mill was the crucible that forged his mature investment philosophy. It taught him that no amount of managerial brilliance or hard work can overcome the terrible economics of a commodity business. He famously said, "When a management with a reputation for brilliance tackles a business with a reputation for bad economics, it is the reputation of the business that remains intact." The Berkshire textile business was his personal Vietnam, a long, costly war he couldn't win. He finally closed the last mill in 1985, long after he had started using the company's cash to buy wonderful businesses like See's Candies and the Washington Post. The experience left an indelible scar and a priceless lesson. It is far more important to be in the right boat than it is to be the best rower. The underlying psychological principles that govern this commodity trap are as powerful as those that create pricing power, but they lead to destruction instead of creation. The dominant force is zero-sum competition. In a market for a differentiated product, the pie can grow. Apple can create new markets and new value. In a commodity market, the pie is fixed. One company's gain in market share is directly another company's loss. This creates a desperate and often irrational environment. This desperation triggers a powerful cognitive bias in executives, loss aversion. Pioneering research by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky showed that humans feel the pain of a loss about twice as strongly as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. For a CEO in a commodity industry, the thought of losing market share is viscerally painful. To avoid this pain, they will make decisions that are financially irrational for the industry as a whole. They will slash prices to maintain volume, even if it means selling their product at or below cost. This starts a domino effect. Competitor B sees competitor A cutting prices, and, fearing its own loss of market share, it cuts prices as well. Soon, the entire industry is engulfed in a price war, destroying profitability for everyone. It's a collective prisoner's dilemma from which there is no easy escape. This is amplified by the herd behavior of both managers and investors. When one company in a sector announces a major capital expenditure to build a new, more efficient factory, the others feel immense pressure to follow suit, lest they be left behind. This leads to massive overcapacity in the industry, which further exacerbates the pressure on prices. Investors are just as guilty. They see the price of a commodity, like oil or copper, start to rise, and they pile into the stocks of commodity producers, driving their prices up. They are chasing past performance, ignoring the fact that the high prices will inevitably incentivize new production, leading to a glut and a subsequent price crash. They are drawn into the cycle, buying at the top and selling in a panic at the bottom, time and time again. To avoid this trap, an investor needs a systematic way to identify these dangerous industries. Michael Porter's famous 5 Forces framework is an excellent mental model for this purpose. It acts as a sort of commodity business detector. You can use it as a checklist to assess the competitive landscape of any industry. The first force is the threat of new entrants. How easy is it for a new company to start competing? For a textile mill or a restaurant, the barriers to entry are low. For a company that relies on a complex patent, like a pharmaceutical firm, or a massive network effect, like Facebook, the barriers are incredibly high. Low barriers to entry almost always lead to fierce price competition. The second force is the bargaining power of buyers. How much power do customers have to drive down prices? For an airline, the buyers, travelers, have immense power thanks to online travel agencies that allow them to compare hundreds of flights in seconds. For Microsoft, the buyers of its Windows operating system, the PC manufacturers, have very little power, as there is no viable alternative. The third force is the bargaining power of suppliers. Can your suppliers raise their prices on you, squeezing your margins? A small construction company is at the mercy of the price of lumber and concrete. A company like Coca-Cola, on the other hand, whose main inputs are sugar, water, and aluminum, has immense purchasing power over its suppliers. The fourth force is the threat of substitute products or services. Is there a different way for customers to get the same job done? Taxis faced a devastating substitute threat from ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft. There is no good substitute for the credit rating services provided by Moody's, another classic Buffett investment. The fifth and final force is the rivalry among existing competitors. Is the industry characterized by a few stable players, or is it a chaotic free-for-all? The airline industry is defined by constant, brutal rivalry. The market for ketchup is a stable duopoly dominated by Heinz and Hunt's. If a business scores poorly on these five forces, if it has low barriers to entry, powerful buyers and suppliers, a high threat of substitutes, and intense rivalry, it is almost certainly a commodity business. It is a trap for capital. Applying this model would have screamed danger for the New England textile industry, and it does the same today for countless other industries. Yet, despite these clear warning signs, the path of the 99% often leads directly into these traps. The most common mistake is the pursuit of growth at any cost. Many entrepreneurs and investors are obsessed with market share as the primary indicator of success. They believe that if they can just become the biggest player, profits will eventually follow. They pursue this goal by being the lowest cost provider, using either operational efficiency or, more commonly, investor capital to subsidize their prices. The American airline industry is the poster child for this fallacy. For over a century, it has been an industry of tremendous growth. The number of passengers has grown exponentially. The revenues are in the hundreds of billions. It is a vital and indispensable part of the modern economy. And yet, as Buffett has famously pointed out, the net cumulative profit of the entire U.S. airline industry since the days of the Wright brothers is close to zero. It has been a black hole for capital. Why? Because it is a perfect storm of the five forces. The barriers to entry are deceptively low. You can lease planes. The buyers are ruthlessly price-sensitive. The suppliers, plane manufacturers like Boeing and Airbus and labor unions, have immense power. The threat of substitutes, cars, trains, video conferencing, is always present, and the rivalry is legendary. Every dollar of profit is competed away. Despite decades of bankruptcies and consolidation, the fundamental economics have never changed. They are selling a commodity, a seat on a metal tube that gets you from point A to point B, and in a commodity business, the lowest price always wins. This destructive reality is laid bare on the financial statements. The direct financial connection between a commodity business and poor returns is undeniable and easily verifiable. When you analyze the financials of a company in a tough, competitive industry, you will see a consistent pattern. First, look at the net profit margins. For a typical airline or a steel company, net margins will be thin in the best of times, often in the low single digits. And they will be highly volatile, swinging from small profits in good years to catastrophic losses in bad years when fuel prices spike or the economy turns down. There is no consistency, no durable profitability. Second, examine the return on invested capital, ROIC. This metric tells you how much profit a company generates for every dollar of capital invested in the business. Commodity businesses are almost always incredibly capital intensive. Airlines have to spend billions on new planes. steel companies have to spend billions on new furnaces. This massive capital base, combined with low profits, results in a chronically low ROIC, often below the company's cost of capital. This means the business is effectively destroying value with every dollar it reinvests. It is on a treadmill to nowhere. Third, look at the statement of cash flows, specifically the line for capital expenditures, or CapEx. In a commodity business, you will see relentlessly high CapEx. They have to spend enormous sums of money year after year just to maintain their current position, to replace old equipment, and to keep up with the competition. This maintenance CapEx consumes most, if not all, of the cash the business generates, leaving little to no free cash flow for the owners. The money comes in, but it goes right back out again. Comparing the financial statements of a company like Southwest Airlines to a company like Microsoft is an education in itself. Both are successful, well-run companies. But one operates in a brutal commodity industry, and the other enjoys a near monopoly with incredible pricing power. The difference in their long-term margins, returns on capital, and free cash flow generation is not a matter of degree, it is a matter of kind. It is the difference between a business that consumes capital and a business that gushes it. And for a long-term investor, that is all the difference in the world. Having explored the paradise of pricing power and the inferno of the commodity trap, we arrive at the final, crucial question. How can we, as investors and entrepreneurs, systematically build and identify these economic fortresses in the modern economy? The answer lies in understanding that pricing power is not an accident. It is the deliberate result of building a deep and abiding trust with your customers. A fascinating story from Warren Buffett's own portfolio illustrates this perfectly: the American Express salad oil scandal of 1963. At the time, American Express was primarily known for its traveler's checks and its iconic charge card. A major part of its business, however, was in warehousing, where it would issue receipts against goods stored in its facilities, and these receipts were then used as collateral for loans. One of its clients was the Allied Crude Vegetable Oil Refining Corporation, run by a man named Tino DeAngelis. DeAngelis was running a massive fraud. He had filled his giant storage tanks in New Jersey mostly with seawater, with only a thin layer of salad oil on top. He used the fraudulent warehouse receipts from American Express to secure over $150 million in loans from Wall Street banks. When the fraud was discovered, Allied collapsed, and the banks came to American Express demanding they make good on the receipts. The potential liability was enormous, threatening to bankrupt the company. Wall Street panicked. The stock price of American Express was cut in half. It seemed like the brand, built on a century of trust, was about to be destroyed. This is when a young Warren Buffett saw an opportunity. Instead of just looking at the headlines and the potential liabilities, he did his own on-the-ground research. He went to restaurants and banks. He talked to merchants. He stood on street corners and observed customers. What he discovered was that the scandal, while devastating to the company's warehousing division, had not dented the trust people had in the core products, the traveler's checks, and the charge card. He saw people continuing to use them without hesitation. Merchants were still proudly displaying the American Express card's welcome sign. The customer's perception of the brand's integrity was so strong that it was completely walled off from the disaster in the salad oil division. He realized that the company's true asset, its economic moat, was the psychological trust that the brand commanded. This trust gave it pricing power. Merchants were willing to pay a higher fee to accept the American Express card because it attracted affluent customers. Customers were willing to pay an annual fee for the card because of the prestige and security it represented. Buffett concluded that the core business was not only intact, but was worth far more than the entire company's beaten-down market capitalization. He invested 40% of his partnership's capital into American Express stock and made a fortune as the company not only survived but thrived. This story reveals a profound truth. A powerful brand is a reservoir of trust that allows a company to weather storms that would sink lesser competitors. This trust, and the pricing power it confers, is the ultimate form of business resilience. The psychological mechanism that underpins this kind of enduring trust is best explained by two concepts: the Lindy effect and social proof. The Lindy effect, a concept popularized by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, suggests that for non-perishable things like technologies or ideas, the future life expectancy is proportional to their current age. In other words, the longer a brand has been around, the longer it is likely to continue to be around. A company like American Express, founded in 1850, or Coca-Cola, founded in 1886, has demonstrated its ability to survive wars, depressions, and technological shifts. This sheer longevity creates a subconscious assumption of reliability and trustworthiness. We trust them because they have always been there. This is powerfully reinforced by social proof, the psychological phenomenon where people assume the actions of others in an attempt to reflect correct behavior for a given situation. When we see that millions of other people and thousands of other businesses trust and use American Express, it provides a powerful mental shortcut. We think, if it's good enough for all of them, it must be good enough for me. This creates a self-reinforcing feedback loop. The more customers a brand has, the more trustworthy it appears, which in turn attracts even more customers. Over time, this can build an almost unassailable competitive advantage, a fortress of collective belief that grants the company immense pricing power. To translate these insights into a concrete action plan, we can create a pricing power audit, a practical mental model for both investors seeking to identify these businesses and entrepreneurs seeking to build them. For the investor, the audit consists of a four-step process. Step 1 is a historical margin analysis. Go back at least 10 years and look at the company's gross and net profit margins. Are they high and stable, or even better, expanding? A history of strong, consistent profitability is the first sign that you're looking at a superior business. Volatile or declining margins are a major red flag. Step 2 is the price versus inflation test. Research the pricing history of the company's main product. Has the company been able to raise prices at a rate that is consistently at or above the general rate of inflation? A company that can't even pass on inflationary cost increases to its customers has zero pricing power. A company that can do so easily has some. A company that can raise prices far in excess of inflation, like See's Candies, has a true economic fortress. Step 3 is a brand perception survey. This is your qualitative check. Dive into customer reviews, social media, and industry publications. Is the brand spoken of with affection and loyalty, or is it treated as a disposable commodity? Look for signs of a tribe-like following, of customers who identify with the brand. This is the source of the financial strength you observed in the first 2 steps. Step 4 is a switching cost calculation. Try to realistically quantify the cost for an average customer to switch to a competitor. Consider the financial costs, the time and effort required, and the psychological risk of trying something new. The higher the switching costs, the deeper the moat. A company that scores well across all 4 of these steps is a prime candidate for a long-term investment. For the entrepreneur who wants to build a business with pricing power from the ground up, the blueprint is different. It's not about analysis, it's about creation. Step 1 is to focus on a niche. Don't try to be everything to everyone. Instead, aim to completely dominate a small, well-defined market. Become the undisputed best solution for a specific group of customers. This focus allows you to build a reputation for expertise and quality, which is the seed of pricing power. Step 2 is to build a brand, not just a product. From day 1, invest in your company's story, its values, and its customer experience. Every touchpoint, from your website to your packaging to your customer service interactions, should reinforce the unique identity you are trying to create. A product can be copied, but a strong brand that lives in the customer's mind is much harder to replicate. Step 3 is to intentionally create high switching costs. If you're building a software product, find ways to integrate it deeply into your customer's daily workflow. If you're building a consumer brand, create an ecosystem of products that work together seamlessly, like Apple has done. The more integrated your solution becomes in your customer's life or business, the harder it will be for them to leave. Step 4 is to become a habit. Design your product or service to become a regular part of your customer's routine. Whether it's the daily cup of coffee from Starbucks or the weekly software report from Salesforce, Habitual use creates a powerful form of lock-in that is based on psychology, not just technology. By following this blueprint, an entrepreneur can lay the foundation for a business that doesn't just compete on price, but commands it. This disciplined long-term approach is the antithesis of the prevailing growth-at-any-cost mentality that defines so much of the modern startup world. The path of the 99% today is often an obsession with disruption for its own sake. Many venture-backed companies are founded on a simple premise: take an existing industry and undercut the incumbents on price, using billions in investor capital to fund the losses. Meal kit delivery services, ride-sharing platforms, and countless direct-to-consumer brands have followed this playbook. They achieve staggering top-line growth and attract millions of users in a very short time. But they often fail to build a real, defensible business. They are training their customers to be price-sensitive, not brand loyal. The customer's relationship is with the discount, not with the company. When the venture capital runs dry and these companies are forced to raise prices to a level that actually covers their costs, they often face a mass exodus of customers who have no allegiance and will flock to the next subsidized competitor. They built a business on a foundation of quicksand. They mistook temporary, subsidized market share for a permanent, defensible moat. They never built pricing power, and without it, a path to long-term, sustainable profitability is often impossible. The ultimate goal for both the investor and the entrepreneur is to find or build a business that exhibits the ultimate financial characteristic: durable, growing free cash flow. This is the direct financial connection, the endgame of the entire strategy. A company with true pricing power, one that can consistently raise prices without needing to proportionally increase its capital investment, becomes a machine for generating cash. This is the holy grail. Think of a company like Moody's, the credit rating agency. Once its reputation and processes are established, it costs them very little to rate an additional bond. But because their rating is essential for any company wanting to borrow money in the capital markets, and because there are only two other major competitors, they can charge a handsome price for this service. The incremental margins are enormous, and the business requires very little additional capital to grow. As a result, it generates a spectacular amount of free cash flow relative to its size. This cash can then be used to reward shareholders through generous dividends and share buybacks, which further compounds wealth over time. Or it can be used to acquire other businesses, as Berkshire Hathaway has done so masterfully. This is the final beautiful equation of Warren Buffett's philosophy. A strong brand built on trust creates a psychological moat. That moat allows for pricing power. Pricing power leads to high and stable profit margins. High margins with low capital requirements lead to a torrent of free cash flow. And that durable free cash flow, reinvested wisely over time, is the ultimate engine of long-term wealth creation. It all begins with that one simple question, the key that unlocks this entire chain of cause and effect. You have just been handed a master key. The question, can this business raise its prices by 10% without losing its customers, is more than just a clever investing tip. It is a profound tool for thinking. It is a scalpel that cuts through the fat of corporate jargon, the noise of quarterly earnings reports, and the hype of market speculation to reveal the true economic soul of a company. You now possess a framework for identifying the small minority of businesses that are truly exceptional, the ones with moats of loyalty and trust so deep that they can stand the test of time. You have learned to distinguish the fleeting appearance of growth from the enduring reality of power. This is a mental model that will serve you not just in investing, but in any business endeavor you ever undertake. But understanding this question, as powerful as it is only the first step on a much longer journey. Warren Buffett's system of thought is not a single pillar. It is a grand cathedral, a network of interconnected mental models that support and reinforce one another. The pricing power question tells you what to look for, the qualitative mark of a truly great business, but it doesn't tell you how much to pay for it. It doesn't tell you top line to act. It doesn't tell you how to think about market fluctuations, or the psychology of fear and greed that drives them. Mastering one principle is a great advantage, but mastering the system is the path to true financial independence. The video that is now appearing on your screen is the next piece of that map. It is the vital link between identifying a fortress-like business and knowing the precise moment to lay siege, to acquire it at a price that makes sense. It bridges the gap between business analysis and company valuation. It takes the what you have just learned and combines it with the equally important when. It is the next link in the chain, the next model in the mental arsenal you are building. Most people will stop here. They will feel satisfied with this new insight and move on. But a very small few, those who are not merely curious but are genuinely committed to mastering the craft of capital allocation, will understand that this is not an end but a beginning. Their ambition is not just to learn a fact but to build a system of wisdom. For those people, the next step is not a choice, it is a necessity. The journey to completing your mental arsenal, to seeing the world through the clear, rational eyes of the world's greatest investor, continues now. Click and take the next step.